Now we're going to talk about one of your early influences. As a matter of fact, probably your major early influence, your father, who was a lineman, and you have talked about him to me for many, many years. Besides the fact that he said we should buy Sears stock, Dean Winter stock, and you didn't, and you told him no. Other than that, he was a better investor than you, even though he's up on these poles, probably knocking stuff in. Tell me about what your father did and what lessons you learned from him that made what you do clearly in a financial business better from someone who worked with his hands.
Sure. My dad, I think he would have preferred me to study engineering in college. He ended up at the end of his career as an engineer in management with a phone company with Bell of PA. He'd started out as a lineman, climbing poles.
Start?
He started right after he finished touring the service during the Korean War.
He was in the Korean War?
He was, but never went to Korea.
Okay.
He was stationed in the U.S. as telecommunications,
really?
Ironically.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so he started out climbing poles and installing telephone lines and phones in people's homes.
Really?
And worked his way
The
up
rotary
over
phones.
time. The rotary phones. Actually, he reminded me when he first started it, the candlestick opera phones
Sure.
that were brass.
Yeah.
And a lot of those ended up in the Monongahela River because they didn't want to take them back to the office. So they came off a bridge, and they're probably worth a fortune somewhere in the bud of that river today.
Yeah.
But he worked his way up in management. My dad did not have a college degree. He'd gone to the University of Pittsburgh on a track scholarship in the 1940s.
Really?
Held state records for a number of years
You
in
never
high
told me
school.
this.
One of my prized possessions is my dad's scrapbook with the medals and ribbons and newspaper clippings from his track days.
I've never known that.
Yeah, fabulous track star, which is the sport I participated in mostly in high school, was sprinter and track and field. I know it doesn't look like it, but back in the day I was pretty fast.
Wow.
You know, the key thing I learned from my dad, my dad was very active, as was my mom, in their church. My mom sang in a choir. My dad was a deacon and an elder in the Presbyterian church, and always, you know, very involved. So they always had us involved in Sunday school and in church services and whatnot. But what I really learned from my dad was how to treat people.
Right.
And my dad said, listen, don't ever kick the janitor in the teeth because tomorrow he might be your boss.
Right.
And just remember the elevator goes down a lot faster than it ever goes up. And, you know, those are subtle things, but when you think about them and, you know, how you're supposed to interact with people in your day-to-day, you know, goings, it's really great advice. And he was a very humble man, and he made sure he always went out of his way to help people, and never seeking anything in return. It was just, that's what he thought the world expected of him, and always stepped forward to do that. So.
And how long did he work as a lineman? How many years?
Oh, he did that for quite a few years. You know, it's funny, my mom was a telephone operator, and when my dad finally moved into the management side, my mom was part of the union, my dad was in management, and he kept, you know, accelerating technology that kept eliminating my mom's job. And when the phone company would go on strike, my mom would take the kids on vacation, and dad would actually have to cross picket lines and work switchboards.
Interesting.
Which was a little dangerous, you know, crossing picket lines. You had to be careful where you parked your car. And,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know,
If
that
the
kind of
tires
thing.
won't be there when you come back.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So it was very funny growing up in a family where you had both sides of the phone company.
Yeah.
And it's very ironic for me when I joined Affinity. You know, they were AT&T's legacy credit union. So my dad had spent some time here in New Jersey working for Bell Labs in Homedale and Murray Hill.
Wow.
And he had gotten me set up for a tour of the AT&T corporate headquarters when I first moved to New Jersey in 1981, and saw their version of the war room and how communications worked around the country. And it was really interesting, very fascinating. But I think he was always, I think he always wanted one of his sons to go into an engineering track, which neither of us did. But it worked out okay.
Wow. I remember talking about your father. I mean, when did he die? He died.
My dad died in 2011, June of 11.
Right. So he was sick for.
Oh, he battled both esophagus cancer and colon cancer for well over a year.
Yeah, and when did he retire? How much prior to that?
He had actually retired when he was 57. You know, ironically, my dad ended up getting a boss after 37 years at the company who wanted him to go out and, you know, drink with the boys and
Yeah, this
carouse.
is what I'm
And
talking about.
that wasn't my dad. My dad ran a carpool, and so that left on time, and he had 3 other people in the car, and he got them delivered to their homes, and then he would come home and either coach or referee kids sports, a lot of my basketball teams, and or work on projects around the house and be home for dinner. We were very much a family oriented, where family dinner was an important time frame.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was the end of, you know, he had the option. They offered him an early retirement package, and I looked at the numbers and said, Dad, you'd have to work another 6 or 7 years for the same package. You might as well take it and enjoy it. And he did.
And he had a decent run till he got sick.
He did, yeah. He did a lot of work for people and consulting, and really just helping people with things. Not always communications. My dad was great with carpentry, automotive, very mechanical, anything electrical, anything plumbing. He could pretty much do it all.
Amazing. My father was a truck mechanic. So I also grew up with someone that had talent. My grandfather was a wealthy man in Poland. And when the Nazis marched east, my father had grown up with my grandfather sending him in a car that my grandfather had bought, but nobody had cars back then, in order to feed poor people. And my father would fix the car. He was a young kid, but he had a talent with his hands. So when the Nazis marched east, my father joined the partisans, and then he fought in the woods in the Russian army. When the Russians got trucks from Churchill and Lend-Lease, it was a whole deal. They asked, does anybody know how to drive? Who knew how to drive then? My father didn't know how to drive, but he knew how a car worked. He went
So
like
he
this.
volunteered.
Overnight, someone taught him how to drive, and he drove a truck in the war, which kept him in the back lines. It saved his life. He became a truck mechanic. So I grew up with a truck mechanic.
Wow.
And so, you know, I, like you, we had some sensitivity to working with your hands. My mother's parents, obviously my father's parents, obviously, but they were killed, so I never knew them. My mother's parents were tailors. So I was a really good tailor as a kid. At class, we used to have sewing class in public school. I don't know if you did, but we had sewing class.
I had a course called Bachelor Pad in high school.
Okay, right.
And I could sew on a button quicker than anybody.
So I would, in about 20 minutes, I could sew an entire apron, and everyone still was getting the thread through the thimble, right? And I was done because my grandparents taught me, right? So even now, at home, I do the sewing, you know. Although there's places that do it better, you know.
Sure.
So these are skills and talents and histories and stuff that people don't have anymore.
Right.
And that's part of what I wanted to share, is how our background has led to the various things that we've done. And hopefully people will be able to see this and contact us for all sorts of advice and ways to look at how they're doing things. They may get a different point of view.